This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can pre-order Final Fantasy by using my link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Hone. In this video, I'm continuing with my Final Fantasy Limited set review. I've already looked at all the multicolored, colorless white, blue, and black cards, and in this video, we're going to look at the red ones. For each of these cards, I'll discuss how I think they'll perform in Limited, that means draft and sealed, and I'll punctuate each evaluation with a letter grade. If you're new to my set reviews and unsure of what my letter grades mean, you can find a guide in the description. There are some things to keep in mind as I review these cards. First, because we're only talking about draft and sealed, I'm only going to be talking about cards that appear in play boosters. I will be looking at the cards on the bonus sheet in their own separate video after I get through the main set. These are also my evaluations of these cards before actually playing with them, since the goal is to have my set review ready for you in time for the pre-release. And that means I'll be wrong about some stuff, but as the format comes into focus, I'll do videos where I discuss how things have turned out. And I want to let you know that there are some set review related perks for being a channel member or a patron. You get access to my ongoing set notes during preview season, and you'll also get a spreadsheet with all of my grades once a set review is complete. If those perks interest you, check out the description where you can find out how to support the channel using one of those methods. Alright, without further ado, let's dive into the look at the red cards in Final Fantasy. First up, we've got Barrett Wallace, who for 3 generic and a red is a 4/4 legendary human rebel at uncommon. He's got reach, and when it attacks, it deals damage equal to the number of equipped creatures you control to defending player. It's nice that Barrett has a solid baseline as a 4-mana 4/4 with reach, because his attack trigger isn't going to do anything special most of the time. Red does have an equipment theme, red-white in particular, and job select makes it more likely you'll just have random equipped creatures. But even with all of that in mind, I think the most likely outcome with Barrett Wallace's attack trigger is going to be like 0 to 1 damage. And that's nice upside to have, but I think overall that just makes him a C. Next, it's Blazing Bomb, which for 1 red mana is a 1/1 elemental at common. Whenever you cast an on-creature spell, if at least 4 mana was spent to cast it, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature, and you can tap it and sacrifice it, and it deals damage equal to its power to target creature. Activate only as a sorcery. This isn't going to start growing until the mid-game, which is a bit of a problem, as it means it'll be kind of irrelevant for a while. The good news is its ability to blow up means that you can turn it into removal in a pinch, and paying 1 to ping a 2/1 or something is fine, although it only being sorcery speed isn't great. And its ability to function as removal will improve the longer the game goes on, and it also works well with equipment. It's just so cheap, and it does a whole bunch of stuff, and that kind of card always seems to overperform, even when the stuff they do seems kind of medium, so I'm going to start this at a C+. Next, it's Call the Mountain Chocobo, which for 3 generic and a red is a common sorcery. Search your library for a mountain card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. Create a 2/2 green bird creature token with, whenever a land you control enters, this token gets +1/+0 until end of turn, and it has flashback for 5 generic and a red. This looks really good to me for a common. It's a 2 for 1. You pay 4 mana for just a 2/2 on the board, which isn't great, but you're also drawing a card, even though it's a mountain, and then you can do it again from the graveyard later. So this adds to the board while making sure you hit a land drop, while helping you hit landfall triggers, and so on, and then you can just do it again later. Like, this is really probably in contention for being one of the best red commons, despite not being like a removal spell, which is usually what reaches that level in most limited formats, but this is not a removal spell. It's just a good value card in multiple ways. Like, even without flashback, this would be a pretty good card. With it, I think it's at least a B-, and honestly, I wouldn't be super shocked if it's just a solid B. Next up, it's Choco Comet, which for X and 2 red is an uncommon sorcery that does X damage to any target, and you create one of those 2/2 green bird creature tokens. So this is a lot like the other card. Even if you're just paying 2 for X, getting a 2/2 and killing an X2 for 4, gonna feel pretty good. And this can take down far bigger things. While the damage part won't ever feel that efficient, once you start to think of it as a 2/2 that does this with an enters trigger, it becomes a lot better, and that's effectively what it is. You can even hit your opponent with it to close out the game. I think it's a B. Next, it's Clive Ifrit's Dominant, which for 4 generic and 2 red is a 5/5 legendary human noble warrior at Mythic Rare. When he enters, you may discard your hand and then draw cards equal to your devotion to red, and you can pay 4 generic and 2 red and tap him and exile him and return him to the battlefield transformed under its owner's control. Activate only as a sorcery. He comes back as Ifrit, Warden of Inferno, which is a 9/9 legendary enchantment creature saga demon. Chapter 1 says Ifrit fights up to one other target creature. Chapter 2 and 3 both say add 4 red. If Ifrit has 3 or more lore counters on it, exile it, then return it to the battlefield front face up. That means you get the Inter's trigger again, which also means you'll have additional mana to cast the cards that you draw. So by the time you reach 6 mana, his Inter's trigger will often just let you draw 2 cards at like a minimum, which is very strong. Or maybe you discard 1 and draw 3 or something, but you're still pretty happy with that. And once he transforms into Ifrit, he's going to kill something with that fight effect. Chapter 2 isn't going to feel that exciting, to be honest, like when you just get Chapter 2, because 4 red mana is not going to do a lot, but you do also get to attack with a 9/9 that turn. And then if it sticks around, you get Chapter 3, and then you can take that 4 red mana and use it to help you cast whatever it is you draw with Clive's Inter's trigger. So overall, he looks really good to me. You know, he gives you value up front that is great. And like all of these, can also transform into a very scary creature. I do think most of his value comes from Chapter 1, which will just let you kill something outright. And, you know, also just being a huge 9/9. So I think this is a bomb, giving him an A. Next, it's Coral Sword, which for 1 red mana is an uncommon artifact equipment with flash. When it enters, attach it to target creature you control. That creature gains first strike until end of turn. Equipped creature gets +1/+0, and it equips for 1 generic. This looks pretty solid. It's basically Kindled Fury, but with the upside that it sticks around and gives +1/+0 on future turns too, and you can move it on to other creatures reasonably cheaply, which, you know, +1/+0 without the first strike on subsequent turns isn't great, but it should be value you're getting in addition to casting this as a combat trick and just killing something outright. And when that's the case, it's going to feel pretty good. Mix in the fact that there's an equipment theme in the set, mix in the fact that a deck like Black-Red wants to cast cheap spells to ping the opponent with their tokens, and this looks like a perfectly solid card to me, giving it a C. Next, it's the Fire Crystal, which for 2 generic and 2 red is a rare legendary artifact. Red spells you cast cost 1 generic less to cast. Creatures you control have haste, and you can pay 4 generic and 2 red to create a token that's a copy of target creature you control. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So this doesn't look very good. Cards that don't add to the board but give you a discount are rarely good and limited. And while haste can be nice, it's not exactly a keyword that immediately impacts your board state. And it's also a keyword that's only ever relevant for a turn. So it's not like one that really improves. Like if it gave first strike, for example, that would improve your board state right away. Haste, not so much. And then the ability can be nice as a mana sink in the late game, but you need good creatures that are already in play to copy, especially because they're only temporary tokens. They will be able to attack because of the Fire Crystal's ability, but it's not really a mana sink ability that permanently adds to your board in most ways either. So overall, I don't like this. I think it's just a D. Next, it's Fire Magic, which for 1 red mana is an uncommon instant with tiered, which means you can choose one of the following additional costs. You can pay 0 additional mana to do 1 damage to each creature. You can pay 2 generic additional mana to do 2 damage to each creature, or you can pay 5 generic additional mana to deal 3 damage to each creature. So a mass damage effect like this is pretty awkward and limited, especially when a card, that's like all it does. Like the only mode it has is to do mass damage, and even though this has 3 separate modes, they're all different mass damage modes. That said, because it is tiered, you get some modality that can allow you to find situations where it does hurt your opponent more than you. Like, you know, if they happen to have 2 X1s in play and you have none, and you can cast Fire Magic for 1 and kill both their creatures, that's going to feel good. And the other modes are similar, where you can kill smaller things and maybe keep your bigger things alive. Problem is your opponent may also have bigger things that you really need to kill and you can't kill them. But the fact this is an instant does mean you can find more windows to use it that hurt your opponent more than it hurts you. You know, like in response to combat tricks and stuff, you can suddenly take another card down when you cast it than whatever it is you're going to give up, because their combat trick will fizzle after you kill their small creature. So overall, this looks solid to me. Usually this kind of card would be like a sideboard card or like a D in your main deck, but I think this one's good enough to be a C. Next, it's Furion, Wild Rose Warrior, who for 2 generic and a red is a 3/3 legendary human rebel warrior at rare. Equipped creatures you control have haste. And whenever a non-token equipment you control enters, create a token that's a copy of it, except it has this equipment's equip abilities, cost 2 generic less to cast. Sacrifice that token at the beginning of the next upkeep. This format, especially with its job select equipment, all of which makes a creature token when it enters, will be especially good here. Even if you can't equip the equipment token you make a copy of, you do get another 1/1 token out of your job select equipment, and once they're spitting out an extra token, they get way, way better. And then maybe you can equip it too, because the equip cost is reduced. those tokens obviously also will have haste. That is one area where it actually works. Problem is, most of the job select creatures are kind of small, but they will be able to attack right away, and then you'll also get another 1/1. So, you know, in a set that didn't have the job select equipment, this would probably just be like a C or a C plus, and didn't have a big equipment theme too. But with all of that going on in this set, this actually looks pretty good, and it's like a red value engine in equipment decks, so I think it's a B. Next, it's Freya Crescent, which for 1 red mana is a 1/1 legendary Rat Knight and uncommon. She has flying during your turn, and you can tap her for 1 red mana and spend this mana only to cast an equipment spell or activate an equip ability. A 1 mana 1/1 that has flying only during your turn is a decent 1-drop for aggro decks, and she's especially good with equipment, where she can make it easier to play and equip them, and she also happens to carry them pretty well thanks to her flying. This is another 1-drop that just seems like it has a ton of upside and will give you back way more than 1 mana worth of value most of the time. And one of the great things about 1-drops too is like you don't feel bad when your opponent kills them, and sometimes they have to when they're powerful, and like a suited up Freya Crescent is the kind of thing they might have to burn a spell on, and that makes you feel fine, whereas the upside is amazing. So I think it's a C+. Next up, it's Gilgamesh, Master at Arms, which for 4 generic and 2 red is a 6/6 legendary human samurai at rare. When it enters or attacks, you look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may put any number of equipment cards from among them on the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. When you put 1 or more equipment onto the battlefield this way, you may attach one of them to a samurai you control. So I think this needs a build-around grade. Top 6 is pretty deep, but there will be red decks that don't have that much equipment. Like if you have 2, there's a pretty decent chance you whiff, in which case this is just a 6 mana 6/6. And sure, you do get the trigger when he attacks 2, which means you get another shot at it, and whiffing twice is harder to do, and he even gets equipped for free, but you still need like a decent amount of equipment for this to really go off. He's not the kind of build-around that has like a really low floor though. Like most red decks are going to be able to get enough value out of him that he's at least like a C+. But red decks with a bunch of equipment, he's just going to be a bomb because he just grabs equipment and puts it on the battlefield and all of that. So he's worth a really high pick, but if you end up in a deck like blue-red, maybe you only have 2 equipment and he's not that good, but the floor is still fine. So that's what makes him still worth such a high pick, because I think he's like a C+ at worst and like a red deck with 2 equipment in it, but definitely has a very high ceiling of an A. Next up, it's Haste Magic, which for 1 generic and a red is a common instant. Target creature gets +3/+1 and gains haste until end of turn. Exile the top card of your library. You may play it until your next end step. This kind of trick can produce some awesome blowouts. This is because it can generate 2-for-1s. If your creature survives and you get an extra card off the top, it feels great. But the nice thing is, even if you have to use it to kill something and not save your creature, which will be more common, it doesn't hurt too much that you lost a creature on board. It is a little sad that the haste part of this card won't be what you want to do all of the time, since using it as a trick has more potential, but again, because it gives you back a card, that means just using it to hit your opponent with something new that just came down is more viable than it would otherwise be. The toughness boost is admittedly meager, but effectively drawing a card with a trick is always a good way to mitigate against the trick's shortcomings. I'm sort of tempted to go full on C+ here, but for now I'm going to sort of temper my expectations and give it a C. Next, it's Hill Gigas, which for 4 generic and 2 red is a 5/4 giant at common with trample, haste, and mountain cycling for 2 generic. You're definitely overpaying for this when you cast it, and you're going to feel that, but it's not by like a massive amount, and being able to cycle it for a mountain in the early game does help offset that sort of thing. Land cycling for 2 is a lot worse than land cycling for 1, but this still looks like a solid card to me. Certainly not one that always makes the cut, though. I'm giving it a C-. Next up, it's Item Shopkeep, which for 1 generic and a red is a 2/2 human citizen at common. Whenever you attack, target attacking equipped creature gains menace until end of turn. This doesn't care what does the attacking, so the turn it comes down, it might make your equipped hero token unblockable. And of course, putting the equipment on the Shopkeep itself can work out okay. This looks like a 2-drop with enough upside to be a solid C. Next, it's Laughing Mad, which for 2 generic and a red is a common instant. As an additional cost to cast this spell, discard a card, draw 2 cards, and it has flashback for 3 generic and a red. This is a little more expensive than this effect usually is, but it's still nice that you can flash it back, giving you some fuel in the late game. One thing to keep in mind too is that all of the cards that are in the blue-red deck that trigger off of you casting a spell with a casting cost of 4 will trigger when you flash something like this back, because those cards all say when you spend 4 or more mana, they don't actually look at the mana value of the cards. So that does help this card out a little bit, because flashing it back will trigger your payoffs like that. and doing it that way is better than having like a really high curve with a bunch of 4 mana or more things. Still, it's not like amazing. You're overpaying for this effect by like 1. In exchange, you get it so that you can flashback it later. So, I mean, I think it's still probably just a C-. Next, it's Light of Judgment, which for 4 generic and a red is a common instant that does 6 damage to target creature, and you destroy up to 1 equipment attached to that creature. This format has a lot of equipment, so you will be hitting one with this sometimes, although it is kind of awkward when your opponent has both a good equipment and a good creature in play, but the good equipment is on a different creature, since they can only hit equipment attached to the creature it targets, but still, being able to kill something they just equipped with this is a nasty 2-for-1. That said, 5 mana, instant speed, deal 6 is a C-level removal spell. It does the job, but it's expensive enough that you will often be paying more to cast it than your opponent paid to cast their creature, so it's just a C. Next, it's Mythics Elder, which for 2 generic and a red is a 1/3 human wizard at common. When it enters, you create a 0/1 black wizard creature token with, whenever you cast it on creature spell, this token deals 1 damage to each opponent. This card's pretty interesting to me because it makes me wonder if these tokens are going to overperform in a big way. Like, I think they're going to be pretty good, but this card seems overcosted. Like, a 3 mana 1/3 that made a 1/1 token straight up without any other abilities would be only an okay card. And I feel like a 0/1 black wizard token is going to be about as good as a 1/1. But maybe they're a lot better when they're costing a card like this. But it does give you 2 bodies. They're both wizards. There's some cards that care about that. It does do the ping thing that you want to be doing in black-red. It's good for sacrifice stuff, so it's probably fine. I'm giving it a C. Next up, it's Nibelheim of Flame, which for 2 generic and 2 red is a mythic rare sorcery. Choose target creature you control. It deals damage equal to its power to each other creature. If this spell is cast from your graveyard, discard your hand and draw 4 cards, and it has flashback for 5 generic, 2 red. This is nuts. If this was only the flashback mode, it would be a bomb, because most of the time what happens is you cast it for flashback, you destroy everything but your best creature, and then you draw 4 cards. Like, that's an insane card. It's like a one-sided wrath that also completely reloads your hand in most cases. Now, it is a little more fragile than a one-sided wrath, because if your opponent destroys a creature you target, you're in trouble. But as long as you pick your spot with it, and as long as you have decently sized creatures in your deck, we've seen this kind of sweeper work really well in Limited a couple of times now. And this one is probably the best one we've seen. It also only costs 4 when you cast it the first time. You can wipe the board twice with it, which is insane. And it is true, once it's in your graveyard, your opponent kind of knows it's coming, but that doesn't always mean they can do something about it. So, yeah, I mean, this just seems insane, like one of the biggest bombs in the set. It'll reshape your board in your favor. It can help you pull ahead even from behind. And you can even make choices sometimes where you actually get to keep more than 1 creature, because you let your creature be one that doesn't kill all of yours, but still kills all of theirs. So, yeah, I mean, this just looks great. I'm giving it an A+. Next up, it's Opera Love Song, which for 1 generic and a red is an uncommon instant, and it says choose 1, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play those cards until your next end step. Or 1 or 2 target creatures each get +2/+0 until end of turn. The card draw mode here is where the action is most of the time. Casting it at the end of your opponent's turn and effectively drawing 2 extra cards for that next turn is good. It won't always pan out that way. You know, this is one that only lasts until your next end step, until the end of your next turn. So if you hit 2 lands, you don't get both of them. You're only going to be able to play one of them. But if you hit a land and a spell, or 2 spells, and you have the mana to cast them, you can certainly play them. So it ends up drawing you 2 cards a decent amount of the time. Sometimes it won't. The other mode's not great. Like, if this was just the combat trick mode, the second mode, it would probably just be an F. It's the kind of buff that just doesn't do enough to help a creature win combat. It can help it punch up, but it still probably dies if it was going to die in combat anyway. So, you know, you have 2 cards here. One of them, I think, is basically an F, the second mode, and the other is probably like a C, because you can't always draw 2 with it. Sometimes it's just like you cycled it. But this is where, like, modality can be pretty good, because that second mode, when it is good, like your creatures get through and they can do lethal, or your creatures are statted in such a way that the buff does make it a one-sided potential 2-for-1 kind of effect, like, that's when that effect can be good. It just doesn't line up that often. And when you're doing that, it's probably because you're ahead and you can attack your opponent really effectively, whereas the other mode can help you find what you need to get card advantage so that you can get back even with your opponent and stuff like that. Overall, I think that makes this card a C. Next up, it's Prompto Argentum, which for 1 generic and a red is a 2/2 legendary human scouted uncommon. He's got haste, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, if at least 4 mana was spent to cast it, you create a treasure token. I don't know much about Final Fantasy 15, but the fact this guy's taking a selfie is pretty interesting. It kind of reminds me of the original Flash, actually, which also looks like a guy taking a selfie weirdly, and it's a card from before cell phones were everywhere. Anyway, it's also a pretty good Magic card. A 2-mana 2/2 with haste is a pretty solid starting point, and getting treasure when you cast things for 4 mana or more for non-creature spells is pretty good, so I think he's a C+. Next up, it's Queen Brane, which for 2 generic and a red is a 2/1 legendary human noble at uncommon with prowess, and when she attacks, you make a 0/1 black wizard creature token. A 3-mana 2/1 with prowess isn't that good. It's a stat line that isn't even good when you trigger prowess once, and that's not usually where you want to be. The reason it's not that good when you trigger it once is because 1-drops and 2-drops can still easily trade with a 3/2, and that's obviously a problem. Her attack trigger is nice. Getting one of those Black Wizard creature tokens is good, but she's just not going to be a good attacker or blocker most of the time, so I don't love this card overall. I think she's a C-. Next, it's Random Encounter, which for 4 generic and 2 red is an uncommon sorcery. Shuffle your library, then mill 4 cards. Put each creature card milled this way onto the battlefield. They gain haste. At the beginning of the next end step, return those creatures to their owner's hand, and it has flashback for 6 generic and 2 red. They definitely nailed the flavor here, but it's not a very good limited card. 6 mana to put some random creatures into play with haste can be really awesome, but you can also end up hitting like 1 creature. Like, that's not far-fetched. In which case, it's a complete and utter disaster, even when that creature returns to your hand. Ultimately, you spend 6 without creating a permanent presence on the board, and I don't like that, even when you do get the cards back. Even with lots of creatures in your deck, hitting 1 to 2 things is a possibility, and those 1 to 2 things aren't even guaranteed to be good. So even with flashback, I think this is an F. Next up, it's Raubon, Bull of Alamigo, which for 1 generic and a red is a 2/2 legendary human warrior at rare. It has ward, pay life equal to Raubon's power, and when he attacks, you attach up to 1 target equipment you control to target attacking creature. A 2-mana 2/2 with this ward ability is probably like a C-. Ward gives it the upside that even if your opponent can kill it for like 1 mana, they have to lose some life. And we already know this set has an equipment theme, so this attack trigger can be relevant. He does have to be the one doing the attacking for that to happen, but he can have the equipment attached to a different creature other than himself. And ward becomes more painful if you do put the equipment on him, generally speaking. And there is some equipment in the set where if you don't have to spend anything to equip it, it's going to feel pretty good. So he seems like a pretty good 2-drop to me. I'm giving him a B-. Next up, it's Red Mage's Rapier, which for 1 generic and a red is a common artifact equipment with job select, which means when it enters, you get a 1/1 hero token, and you attach this to it. And the equipped creature has, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn, and is a wizard in addition to its other types, and it equips for 3 generic. This does not look good. A 2-mana 1/1 with this ability isn't good. Like, that creature is very easy for your opponent to just, like, block with a token, and it's frequently just going to be a 1/1, and most of the time the best it's going to be able to do is 3/1, and that's not exactly moving the needle. Moving this to other creatures that can get the boost isn't great either, especially because the turn you equip it, you're less likely to have mana to cast non-creature spells. So this just looks like a D to me. It is saved partly by just being an equipment when there is tons of ways to take advantage of equipment, and also by the black-red deck, which might be able to chain enough spells together to make like a creature really scary with this, but overall it just seems a little bit overcosted and underpowered to me. Next up, it's Sabotender, which for 1 generic and a red is a 2/1 plant at common with reach, and it has landfall. Whenever land you control enters, this creature deals 1 damage to each opponent. This is a solid but unexciting 2-drop. It's nice that it can trade for small flyers in a pinch, and it's going to ping your opponent some. I'm giving it a C. Next, it's Samurai's Katana, which for 2 generic and a red is an uncommon artifact equipment with job select. The equipped creature gets +2/+2, has trample and haste, and is a samurai in addition to its other types, and it can equip for 5 generic. So I'm super happy with a 3-mana 3/3 with trample and haste, and this has a ton of upside beyond that thanks to the whole job select thing. It's admittedly expensive to move around, but in the late game, it's going to feel fine to spend a turn putting this on your best creature and swinging. And there also are a few ways to move equipment at a discount or for free. and not just at higher rarities. So moving this and allowing you to get a nice buff on something else that can take more advantage of it than a 1/1 token is good. Playing this on 3 is good, and then you have this equipment sitting around. Like after your opponent trades with your 3/3, you have this equipment sitting around as a threat the rest of the game. So this looks quite good to me, giving it a B. Next, it's Sandworm, which for 4 generic and a red is a 5/4 worm at uncommon. It's got haste. When it enters, you destroy target land, and its controller may search their library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. A 5-mana 5/4 with haste is like probably a C-. It feels pretty good when it can come down and just smash in, but there are a lot of situations where it can't. And the stat line, the toughness is low enough that it's a little bit of a liability sometimes. But I do like this enters trigger. You know, you can use it to destroy a town, which certainly matters, especially against blue-green decks. So you can destroy your opponent's land, but you can also destroy your own land to fix your own mana, potentially, and also to trigger landfall. So there are going to be some big turns where you can cast this haste creature, grab a land, trigger landfall on 2 things, and maybe have triggered it twice in a turn because you also played a land to cast the Sandworm, and those are going to be really big turns. So I think this ability, this enters trigger, is actually pretty good because of its flexibility. You can punish decks reliant on towns or on non-basics more generally, and you can help yourself with landfall. So I think this ends up being a C+. Next, it's Cypher Almasi, which for 3 generic and a red is a 3/4 legendary human knight at rare. Whenever a creature you control attacks alone, it gains double strike until end of turn. And whenever Cypher Almasi deals combat damage to a player, you may cast target instant or sorcery card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. If that spell would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead. This is pretty sweet. It can offer the double strike buff the turn it comes down. And on turn 4, there's a good chance you have a creature that can take pretty good advantage of a double strike boost by attacking alone. Casting spells out of the graveyard for free is nuts too, even if they have to be cheap ones. And obviously if they let this through, you can potentially cast 2 cheap spells. And if you're doing that, it's probably game over. Giving a double striker that kind of upside makes it really tough on your opponent too, since they're unlikely to have good blocks, but letting it through can be even worse. So this looks quite good to me. I'm giving it a B+. Next, it's Self-Destruct, which for 1 generic and a red is an uncommon instant. Target creature you control deals X damage to any other target and X damage to itself, where X is its power. So this is really interesting. It's kind of like a fling effect. It's more flexible because your creature doesn't die 100% of the time, but the outcome will still often be giving up your creature and doing damage to something equal to its power. More creatures have equal power and toughness or higher power than toughness, so more often than not, your creature will die from this, but it does have the upside of if you've got like a 3/4 and you can have it do 3 damage to something else and 3 to itself, it just becomes a removal spell. The bad news is if your opponent does kill your creature in response, it's like getting blown out with a fight or bite effect, so that's something to keep in mind. That's something that Fling doesn't have to worry about because you sack the creature as a cost, not as, you don't target your creature. So this is a pretty interesting card to evaluate, and it's a neat design. I'm curious to see how it pans out. I do think most of the time it's going to feel like Fling, and Fling is not a great card in Limited, but I think the fact it can hit any target, I think the fact that it can just operate as a straight up removal spell on creatures with higher toughness than power, I think that makes it a playable card. I think it's a C, but it is such a different card than what we've seen before that I could see it being better or worse than this. Next up, it's Side Quest, play Blitzball, which for 2 generic and a red is an uncommon enchantment. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gets +2/+0 until end of turn. At the end of combat on your turn, if a player was dealt 6 or more combat damage this turn, transform this enchantment, then attach it to a creature you control. It comes back as World Champion Celestial Weapon, a legendary artifact equipment that gives the equipped creature +2/+0 and double strike and equips for 3 generic. So this kind of impacts the board the turn you play it with that +2/+0 boost, but that's not consistently useful. And this seems a little bit like a win more card because if you can do 6 or more combat damage to your opponent, you're probably already ahead and things are going pretty well for you. It's true that getting the equipment is a nice payoff and it will make one creature really, really scary. And even moving it around isn't that expensive for how good it is. But I just think it's going to be tough to transform this when you need to, which is when you're, at parity or behind, and pretty easy to transform when you're already ahead, but at that point, do you really need it? So I think this is probably a D. Next up, it's Sorceress's Schemes, which for 3 generic and a red is an uncommon sorcery. Return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard or exiled card with flashback you own to your hand, add 1 red mana, and it has flashback for 4 generic and a red. This is another cool design, but I think it's a little expensive and too clunky for limited, even when it gives you back mana. The idea is that you can use this to get spells back twice, which is ultimately a 2-for-1, and if you get an exiled flashback card back, it will kind of feel like a 3-for-1. However, it just seems too expensive and too slow. I'm giving it a D. Next up, it's Summon Brynhildr, which for 1 generic and a red is a 2/1 enchantment creature, Saga Knight at rare. Chapter 1 exiles the top card of your library, and during any turn you put a lore counter on this saga, you can play that card. And chapters 2 and 3 say when you next cast a creature spell this turn, it gains haste until end of turn. So this is a 2-mana 2/1 that is pretty likely to effectively draw you a card and then make your creature spells a little better on subsequent turns, and you'll more than likely have one, or at least you'll be more likely to have one because of Chapter 1, which digs you deeper into your deck. Brynhildr will only be around for 1 attack and 2 blocks, and it's not that good at either of those things, and if your opponent takes it down for like 1 mana and you didn't play the card from Chapter 1, it's not going to feel great. But I think this generates an effect pretty close to a 2-for-1 most of the time, and it might even be better in the later game when you can cast a spell that gives you immediately, although you are less likely to take advantage of chapters 2 and 3. But this looks like a good value card. Like, it's going to feel good to play this on turn 2, and if the fail case is your opponent kills it, that's not a disaster. You're just not going to be generating the 2-for-1 you probably had ready to go. So I think it's still pretty good, giving it a B. Next up, it's Summon Esper Ramu, which for 2 generic and 2 red is a 3/3 enchantment creature, Saga Wizard at uncommon. Chapter 1 says this creature deals damage equal to the number of non-creature, non-land cards in your graveyard to target creature an opponent controls. And chapters 2 and 3 say wizards you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. So if you have enough non-creature, non-land cards in your deck, that chapter 1 is pretty nice as it becomes a removal spell attached to a creature. One thing I don't love is that they didn't give us like a clause that makes it so your exiled flashback cards are counted. So if you draw this late and you've flashbacked a couple things, this becomes weaker, and that does bother me, but it still seems pretty good if you're a heavy spell deck. That said, I do think it needs to be a build around, because if you're not a deck that can consistently at least do 2 damage with this when it enters, it's just not going to be good enough, because chapters 2 and 3 aren't exactly backbreaking. Your temporary 4-mana 3/3 isn't great. This saga is super reliant on chapter 1 doing something. Chapters 2 and 3 can do something, and it does buff itself with chapter 2. If you have a bunch of those 0/1s in play, they're all going to be able to attack as 1/1s for a turn, and there are a lot of wizards in this set, but it's a meager buff, and it's not one that's going to be like game-breaking most of the time. So you need chapter 1 to do its thing, and if it's not, this is not a very good card. Like, I think most red decks will have enough spells to do 2 or more with it a decent amount of time, so it's not like an F in every red deck other than a spell-heavy one, but I think it's like a D, and it has a ceiling around a B-. Next, it's Summon GF Cerberus, which for 2 generic and 2 red is an enchantment creature, Saga Dog. At rare, it's a 3/3. Chapter 1 surveils 1. Chapter 2 says, when you next cast an instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy. And Chapter 3 says, when you next target an instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy it twice. You may choose new targets for the copies. A 4-mana 3/3 that surveils 1 when it enters isn't good, but that surveil does increase your chances of having Chapter 2 and 3 at their best. And if you can double spell on 2 and triple spell on 3, it's just game over. It almost doesn't even matter what spells they are because you get such insane value. That said, you're not always going to pull that off. In fact, I would guess that making both Chapter 2 and 3 relevant on subsequent turns is going to be pretty hard in Limited. But the good news is, 2 red decks in this format will have lots of instants and sorceries, and for that reason, I do think you'll at least be able to either double or triple a spell, and if you're doubling a draw spell with Chapter 2, tripling a spell on Chapter 3 becomes a lot more likely because you'll draw a bunch of cards. I do think this is good enough even outside of really specific spell decks, because you really only need 1 spell to turn this into something really good. You don't need like several around to make it work. But it does get better when you have a lot of spells, especially, again, if you can double a draw spell on 2 and then triple something on 3, it's just game over. So this looks pretty good to me. It takes some work. It's a little slow. It is one of these sagas that if your opponent just kills it right away, you aren't getting 2-for-1 value no matter what, because Chapter 1 is so medium. So I think it's just a B. Next up, it's Summon GF Ifrit, which for 2 generic and a red is a 3/2 enchantment creature Saga Demon at common. Chapter 1 and 2 say you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. And Chapter 3 and 4 say add red. So a 3-mana 3/2 that lets you discard and draw when it enters is a playable card, and this does it twice and can even ramp your mana a bit. Of course, that's assuming you don't trade it off at some point in there. The good news is doing so is fine, and because it has 4 chapters, it sticks around longer than most of these, so it can block 3 times and attack twice, which, it's a 3/2, so that's not that exciting, but it does matter. And its first 2 chapters are pretty good in the late game, even though Chapter 3 and 4 become less good, so this looks like a good common to me. I'm giving it a C+. Next, it's Suplex, which for 1 generic and a red is a common sorcery. It says choose one. Suplex deals 3 damage to target creature. If that creature would die this turn, exile it instead, or exile target artifact. So this is sorcery speed Abrade, and while not being an instant hurts, its actual effects are upgraded versions of Abrade since it exiles the stuff it gets rid of. Turning off death triggers and stopping future recursion is a big deal, and while it's not easy to produce blowouts with, since it's not an instant, this still looks like premium removal to me, giving it a B-. Next, it's Thunder Magic, which for 1 red is a common instant. It's another one of these tiered spells. If you pay 0 additional mana, it does 2 damage to target creature. If you pay 3 generic additional mana, it does 4 to target creature. And if you pay 5 generic and a red additional mana, it deals 8 damage to target creature. So this is really good. The starting point is a shock that only hits creatures, and that's already great because it's so easy to trade up with. And then this can scale the longer the game goes and take down just about anything in the late game. The more expensive modes won't ever feel efficient, but they're modes you get access to when a card that's already really, really good. I'm giving this a B. It's probably red's best common as much as I want that Chocobo card to be. Next up, it's Triple Triad, which for 3 generic and 3 red is a rare enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, each player exiles a top card of their library. Until end of turn, you may play the card you own exiled this way, and each other card exiled this way with lesser mana value than it, without paying their mana cost. So first off, this is a 6-mana enchantment that doesn't do anything to the board at first. Taking a whole turn off like that just isn't that good of an idea in most limited formats. And we've seen even cheaper cards that basically let you draw extra cards each turn not work out because of that problem. This one is extra enticing, since it lets you play the card you reveal for free and might even let you play a second card for free. And that is certainly an advantage that makes this go a little wild. But what if you reveal a land with the first trigger? That sounds like a huge disaster to me, since it may mean you're not adding to the board again, which probably also means it's time to scoop. Basically, if you're not already ahead, finding the time to cast this is risky, and even though it will take over the game when it gets going, that kind of time is a luxury you just don't always have. I think I have to start this at a D, with the caveat that if this is a slow format where super grindy slow decks are a thing, this will become like a game-winning enchantment. Next up, it's Unexpected Request, which for 2 generic and a red is an uncommon sorcery. It says gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature, it gains haste until end of turn. You may attach an equipment you control to that creature. If you do, unattach it at the beginning of the next end step. So this will feel pretty good in really aggressive equipment decks, and kind of bad everywhere else. The free equip will come in handy in that style of deck, and threat and effects are already better in aggro decks to begin with. Red doesn't have a massive sacrifice theme in this format, but if you can get a few ways to sacrifice the creature you steal, it does get better. But this needs a build around grade. It's going to be a D in most red decks, but a C+ in a deck like Red-White. Next, it's Vaughn, Street Thief, which for 2 generic and a red is a 2/2 legendary human scout at rare. Whenever one or more scouts, pirates, and or rogues you control deal combat damage to a player, exile the top card of that player's library. You may cast it. If you don't, create a treasure token. Whenever you cast a spell you don't own, put a +1/+1 counter on each scout, pirate, and rogue you control. So the Grey Ogre starting stat line is brutal, and while Vaughn does count himself with both abilities, getting in with a 3-mana 2/2 can be pretty challenging. That said, effectively drawing a card when creatures with the right type hit the opponent, and getting extra value out of those cards in the form of counters and or treasure is quite strong. Unlike most versions of this effect, it doesn't let you play lands off of it, but you do get that treasure, so that's fine. I do think this needs a build-around grade. On its own, it's probably a D+ because it will be so challenging to trigger it, but if your deck has 4 other creatures with the right types, I think it can be a B. Like, if you play this and get in with something the turn you play it, you're going to feel like you've already come out ahead. Next, it's Warrior's Sword, which for 3 generic and a red is a common artifact equipment with job select. The equipped creature gets +3/+2 and is a warrior in addition to its other types, and this equips for 5 generic. So this is a 4 mana 4/3 that generates 2 permanents and has a buff that you can move around whenever you need to. Throw in the fact that this set has lots of equipment stuff going on in red, and that this triggers the non-creature spell payoffs in both black and red, and this looks fine, giving it a C. And our last card is Zell-Dinched, which for 2 generic and a red is a 0/3 legendary human monk at rare. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. Zell-Dinched gets +1/+0 for each land you control. At the beginning of your end step, return a land you control to its owner's hand. So he'll usually have pretty high power for the cost, and his additional land ability can help on that front, although it's worth noting that those words are often meaningless and limited. Of course, the fact he bounces lands does mean you'll be able to take more advantage of it than usual, but only because of this card's pseudo downside. There are a few lands in the set you can get value out of by rebuying them, but that's not true most of the time. The real value is that you can potentially trigger landfall twice a turn, kind of consistently with him, and while he doesn't take huge advantage of that, there are plenty of red cards that do. And there are going to be times where you play him and you really don't want to bounce a land. It's really unfortunate it's not a May trigger. That would make it so much better, because playing this on 3, for example, and having to bounce your land, you don't really want to be there. You do next turn, assuming you have the extra land, get to play 2 lands, so he kind of helps you catch back up. But there are going to be times when he doesn't. So I think he's just a C+. He seems like a sweet value engine and enabler in the right deck, and especially good in the later stages of the game where he's just a huge high-power creature. But on turn 3 especially, he seems pretty awkward. So those are all the red cards in Final Fantasy. In the next video, I'll look at all the green ones. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you want to catch up on the rest of this set review, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.